I've got one of my favorite little spinning rods in my hand. It's a 6'6", medium light fast. I've got a little 3000 spinning reel on here with 15-pound braid. These are the types of baits that I like to throw in shallow salt water. I like this rod because I can make these baits look alive, and that's the secret to catching fish in saltwater, is you got to make those baits look alive. I'd like to show you the steps of putting this rod together. My first step is to gather up all my parts from the grip all the way down to the thread. Next, I need to mark the spine of my blank. I bend the rod, it will jump into a pronounced curve, and I have a buddy mark on a piece of tape the inside of the curve. Next, I like to cut my spinning reel seats as short as possible where they'll still accept my reel. That makes them a lot more comfortable in my hand. I mark it with a piece of tape. By cutting your reel seat, you have less reel seat and more comfortable carp. Next, I go to my chop saw with a fine tooth blade and cut it off. Now I'm going to glue my reel seat arbor into my reel seat. I like to do it fast, so I use 5-minute epoxy. I'll measure equal portions, whip that up real good with a popsicle stick. You know, I like to mix up all my epoxy glues on a glossy magazine. That way I can rip a page off and throw it away. I like to use a screwdriver to roll that arbor in the glue, and then I'll prime the reel seat with a little bit of glue before I shove the arbor into the reel seat. Then I'll push it in, recess it just a little bit, and clean it up. While that arbor sets up in that reel seat, I'm going to cut my rear grip to length. I'm going to cut it to 6 1/4 inches. I know that's how long I want it. And I'll mark it, then I'll cut it on a chop saw. Okay, next I want to slide this little grip onto our little car clay setup. I have a steel mandrel with a little masking tape so it fits on there tight. I want to round over that little sharp edge where we cut that rear grip to length. I want to use a little 220 and maybe 400 grit sandpaper to clean up that edge. Round it over a little bit. You know, to me, cark is to a fishing rod is leather to a cowboy boots. Next, I got to make my grip and reel seat fit my blank, and I use pilot bits to keep them on center before I put them on my reamer. The purpose of a pilot bit is to enlarge the hole on a pre-shaped grip and reel seat arbor on center before you put it on your reamer. We have two types of pilot bits. We have our standard pilot bit and our reverse pilot bit for longer rear grips. Now I put my rear grip, my reel seat, and my foregrip on my blank to see how much reaming I need to do. I have a power reamer that matches the taper of my blank, and I'll ream those parts out to fit my blank. You want to be conservative when you're reaming out a grip. Go back and forth from your reamer to your blank and check it out, and you want it to be snug but not too tight. Try not to over-ream your carp, but if you do, you could add a little spiral of masking tape around the blank, and that'll take up that space. I just repeat this process with the reel seat and the foregrip. This baby is ready to glue up. First, I'm going to glue on my rear grip with 5-minute epoxy because I want to move on. Now, mix up that epoxy real good. Put it on your blank. You can brush it on there with a popsicle stick. Slide that grip into place. Work it up and down a couple of times. That spreads that glue out. Slide it into place. Wipe that glue off on the bottom. That's easy to do. Then take a paper towel and clean off that rod blank above that grip. Now, while that rear grip is setting up, I'm going to grind my guides to make a really smooth transition from the rod blank up onto the guide. It makes it a whole lot easier to wrap if you will spend a little time grinding those guides really good. Now I'm going to glue my reel seat and foregrip in place. I'm going to use 5-minute epoxy because I can work fast and get it done. I slide that reel seat into place, work it up and down a little bit. Then as I slide it down, I'll take a paper towel and wipe some of the excess glue off and keep it from oozing out and making a mess. Once you slide that reel seat into place, you line up the hoods that will be holding the reel with the markings that you put on the rod that mark the spine. You want the rod to bend easiest towards the fish. Next, with that same batch I mixed up for that reel seat, I'm going to glue on that foregrip. And so I'll put a little epoxy on there with that popsicle stick, slide it into place, And right before I push it to its final destination, I wipe off just a little bit of that glue so it doesn't come oozing out all over that reel seat. Finally, I want to clean up that rod blank in front of that foregrip with a paper towel with a little denatured alcohol on it. Before I start wrapping on this rod, I always like to clean it up, and I use a little diluted orange cleaner that I buy at Home Depot with a paper towel, and I wipe it down with that. Then I use a damp paper towel, and then I use a dry paper towel to finally clean it up. Now I slide on a little temporary butt cap that I don't glue it on because it slides into my chuck on my power wrapper really nice. All of our power wrappers come with a little device that will lock our motor on our power wrapper. So you can put the hoods on your reel seat straight down, line it up straight down, then you can go down to the tip of your rod and glue your tip on, and all you have to do is glue it on straight down and you don't even have to look at your reel seat. Okay, this is a handy tool for me. It's a 3/4 by 3/4 piece of pine that I cut. And whenever I design a rod, I put all the information about the rod on one side of this wood here. And on this piece of wood, I got information about 4 different rods. And I have the handle information. I have the blank information, 6X, medium, light, fast. I have all the guide spacing written down on here and the size of all the guides. So I can use this to transfer the guide spacing to this rod blank. You know, I put my hood straight up and down, and then you don't have to compare it to your hoods anymore. Now I want to glue my guides on my blank with Flex Coat guide foot adhesive. You can tell when you're standing straight over that rod by looking straight down to that plastic piece on the center strip, and you can glue those guides on straight. Work your way all the way down the rod. Now it's time to wrap the guides on this high performance rod. You know, what I really like about this power rod wrapper is that it's a direct drive motor and that it makes it really easy to rotate it by hand if you want to. And also you can back it up. You know, I trim off that little tag after I get it started and go ahead and wrap that guide on that. I ground the guide so it climbs up on that guide foot real easy. I use a little yellow Power Pro braided line, and it's real slick. It's called Super Slick, and I use that because it pulls through your thread real easy, and it doesn't cause any kind of problem. I've been using it for a long time. I pull back a little gap in that thread so I can cut it off with a utility knife. I don't slice, I chop and pull on the thread at the same time. I'll tighten up those wraps by burnishing the thread with either the polished handle on a pair of clippers or a bone burnishing tool. I put very little decoration on the rods that I build. You know, I build these rods fast. I try not to spend over 30 minutes wrapping them. So I'll put a little accent on there with another color. And actually I'll start and do 3 little tags here, but I don't tie them off in between tags. I'll just put a little spiral in there and keep going. The only decoration that I put on this rod is at the stripper guide and right in front of the foregrip. Okay, I'm going to work my way down this rod and get it all wrapped up. Now I put on my hook keeper. I put a little 3/4 inch wrap right in front of that foregrip. I glue on the hook keeper with guide foot adhesive. Then I wrap right up onto the foot of the hook keeper. Next, I put on my minimum fish marks. I have an arrow shaft marked so that I can measure from the end of the foregrip up the rod 15 inches for a speckled trout and 20 inches for a redfish. With the utility knife, I put a very light scratch in the finish on the blank so that I can do those minimum fish wraps very accurately. As you can see, I check to see if those marks are accurate to keep me out of trouble. After you complete all your wrapping, I like to go outside and hold that rod up to a blue sky and do a little guide tweaking to get them exactly straight. Even if you glue your guides on, you can tweak them just a little bit. Now it's time to put a finish on this rod. We'll put this rod into our 200 RPM finishing machine, and we will start by measuring and mixing our finish. I like to measure in a mixing cup no less than 5 cc's of each part. Mixing is a very important step. You need to mix your finish thoroughly. I mix with a round non-porous stirrer till my finish is crystal clear. No more marble streaks. Totally mixed. There'll be a few little bubbles in there, but don't worry about those. Pour it out on aluminum foil. That will double or triple your pot life. Now you're ready to apply it to your rod. I like to put 2 coats on my rods, and I call the first coat a primer coat. I start at the tip of the rod and work my way to the butt. Now on our minimum fish tags, it's hard to paint a 1/8 inch wide stripe really neatly, so I put tape on one side of it. Then I'll start the finish on the tape and work its way over onto the thread. I like to apply enough finish so that it will soak into the thread and fill that tunnel caused by the blank, the thread, and the guide foot. I like to start at the base of the guide foot and work my way towards the guide. You need to have enough finish on there so that it will fill that tunnel. It'll draw down in and fill that tunnel. You can help it a little bit by just flashing it real quick with a torch. Be careful. If you look close, you can tell when that finish is soaked all the way down into the blank because it will creep out right at the base of the guide. Remember, you've got to remove that tape before the finish starts setting up. Now with this primer coat, it's time to take off all the excess finish you can get off. You'll probably be able to see the texture of the thread. Now that we've applied the finish to our first primer coat, we'll rotate this rod for 2.5 to 3 hours, and then we'll recoat it again for the final coat in about 8 hours. Now that my primer coat is completely set up, I'm going to apply the second coat. I've already sliced off any imperfections in my first coat. Now I'm going to put the final coat on this rod, and kind of what you see is what you get. Earlier I put on a temporary butt cap. Now I'm going to use 5-minute epoxy to apply my permanent butt cap. And we're through with the rod. I like to build my rods fast, the way I want them, with the best components I can get. Keep it simple and go fishing.